After her divorce, my sister moved in for what I thought would be a short time, but then she began to act like she was the owner of my home. When she tried to change the decor and get rid of the belongings of my deceased wife, I gave her a day to get out. She then called our parents while sobbing. Because of this, I arrived at our Sunday dinner with video evidence of her selling my wife's jewelry. I guess this story begins with something minor, something that didn't seem important at the time, yet in retrospect, it was a warning sign. I didn't pay much attention to it back then. It's strange how the larger context can be lost when you are preoccupied with specifics, but I was simply trying to be a good brother. One day, out of the blue, my younger sister, Piper, phoned me. I had been expecting it, actually. She had been going through a tough period in her life. Her marriage had ended. I didn't know all the details at first, but I understood it wasn't good. Nathan, her ex-husband, was somebody I never truly had faith in. I don't think she did either. From the start, he had a certain something about him that annoyed me, but that isn't the issue. Anyway, Piper phones and she is distressed, wondering if she could stay with me for a while. She explained that she didn't have another place to go and needed some time to figure things out. Truthfully, I wasn't exactly excited about the idea. It wasn't that I didn't want to offer her help, it was more that I wasn't used to having another person in the house. Ever since Riley died, it's just been me. The house seemed empty, quieter than it used to be. My life felt stable, so when my sister moving in unexpectedly felt a bit jarring, I remembered the meaning of family. I told her to come live with me, hoping it wouldn't be longer than a month. She showed up within days. Frankly, I didn't know what to anticipate. Piper had always been, how should I put it, theatrical. She loved making a big show of things, even arriving at my place with luggage bursting at the seams and a yoga mat casually thrown over her shoulder. I attempted to take things slowly. I did have an extra room. The spare bedroom was unused, so it seemed like the most logical thing to do. It wasn't the first time we had resided together, but it had been ages since we shared a dwelling, and I wasn't ready for the adjustment. I had become accustomed to solitude, to the quiet. I missed Riley terribly, and it was like something was missing daily. However, having Piper around meant that the whole atmosphere of my home changed in a way I hadn't anticipated. The initial few days went smoothly. She kept to herself, spent considerable time talking on the phone with her friends, shedding tears about Nathan and puzzling over what had happened. I understood, and I didn't say anything. We didn't converse much, which was perfectly fine. I was allowing her room to recover. But after a while, minor annoyances started. Initially, I realized my furniture was rearranged. I dismissed it initially. Perhaps she was just bored or wanted to make the area feel more inviting. Therefore, I let it go. Then a couple of days after that, she mentioned she was considering revamping the living room. She wasn't actually asking, she was just letting me know, and it was completely offhand. It was as if the decision was already final. I recall being in the living room's entrance, watching her reposition the sofa pillows and examining the area like she was assessing it for a remodel. "I believe this room could use some more vibrancy," she mentioned, her gaze moving over the walls. I didn't know what to say to that. "It's fine the way it is," I responded, even though I felt this small, sharp pang in my heart. That was our space, you know. Riley and I had selected every piece of furniture together. The aged leather chairs, the wooden coffee table, the rug that was oversized for the room, but we didn't care. It was a home. And now Piper was acting like she had a say in what stayed and what was removed. It was subtle, definitely, but it was enough to make me uncomfortable. A few days after that, the kitchen was the topic. "The cabinets are a bit old-fashioned, don't you think?" she asked one morning while we were eating. "I mean, maybe we should paint them, or I interjected. I wasn't sure why I suddenly felt so defensive. It wasn't like I'd given her any indication that she was overstepping, but the thought of someone else coming in and altering things that I'd shared with Riley, it just didn't feel right to me. She stopped speaking, looked directly at me, and then just gave a little shrug. "I only thought it would be nice if we updated things a little." I didn't even know what to say at all. It seemed like I couldn't. I'll share how Riley's and my kitchen felt to me, how the soft, sunny walls and the antique wood tables symbolized so much more than just decor. They held all the memories. I really didn't want anyone messing with that. I kept these feelings private, however. I was uncertain if my feelings were excessive or if maybe she just didn't understand. Piper, as always, was the sort of person who didn't pause before speaking or acting, and I wondered if I was being overly sensitive. Maybe I was just handling my grief uniquely, and I probably shouldn't expect her to change. But things just continued to worsen after that. I began to see her roaming around the house more often, not only in the living spaces, but also in the attic and spare bedrooms, places I hadn't even considered in ages. Then one day I found her in the attic, going through old boxes. When I inquired what she was doing, she said she was searching for items to give away. That's when I snapped. "What stuff?" I demanded, my voice cracking more than I wanted it to. "Just things you don't need," she said, her manner relaxed, even though I could hear how excited she was. "Like all this old stuff from Riley, I mean you don't need it anymore, do you?" Her words struck me hard. I didn't respond immediately, but the thought of her rummaging through Riley's belongings, my wife's things, as if they had become unimportant or even worse, like they were meant to be discarded. It was unbearable. I knew I needed to say something, though I didn't. I don't even have a clue where to begin. Where do you even start when you want to tell a family member they've gone too far? How can you get someone to understand that my wife's memory wasn't just a bunch of old, worthless things? I attempted to shove the idea aside, convincing myself that she was just dealing with her own issues, trying to figure things out. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just that. Something was definitely wrong. Piper wasn't just here visiting. She was acting as though she had the authority to take over. And it wasn't until I noticed her moving my wife's old jewelry so nonchalantly, as if it didn't matter at all, that I realized this wasn't a simple visit. I just had no idea how far this situation would go. I don't know if there's a specific point when you finally understand that things are out of control, or if it's just a gradual thing that you try to ignore until it's too late. But there's one moment in time. That was the moment when Piper casually mentioned the possibility of replacing the kitchen cabinets. Like I said before, I had managed to remain calm up to then. Sure, I felt uneasy with her moving things around and all her little comments, but I thought I could let it go. She was going through a tough period, correct? As I stirred my coffee one morning, she mentioned that the kitchen cabinets looked old. She suggested we repaint them, perhaps in a darker shade, or even consider a complete style overhaul to freshen things up, you know. That comment hit me with a sudden jolt. I wasn't sure who she meant by we, but it was the way she said the words that caught me off guard. It felt like she had some sort of claim on the house, you know. It wasn't just a casual idea anymore. It felt like she was beginning to see herself as a fixture in this house, which was my home. I was on the verge of saying the kitchen was perfectly adequate and didn't require any changes, but before I could get a word out, she continued, her voice light, but a hidden layer of seriousness underneath. She said she knew things had been difficult since, well, you know. She paused, not showing genuine concern. Since Riley passed, but aren't you still stuck in the past, surrounded by all of this? She waved her hand vaguely at the kitchen, and her words cut like a knife. Stuck in the past, I tightened my jaw. This conversation wasn't about the kitchen. It wasn't about a fresh coat of paint. It was about something more significant, something that was starting to really bother me. "I don't want a new style, Piper," I told her, keeping my voice even. "The cabinets are perfectly fine the way they are." She looked at me skeptically but didn't immediately argue. She just gazed at me, that look in her eyes, and I felt that. I could tell what she was thinking. "What's wrong with you? Why can't you just let it go?" However, she didn't say it out loud. Not at that moment. When I got back from work that night, things started to feel even more unsettling. Upon entering the living room, I saw Piper again, changing things around. This time, it wasn't only the couch pillows. She moved a whole bookshelf, completely changed the way everything was set up, and she was standing there, hands on her waist, looking over the room like she was about to make a decision that affected everyone. Is this what you desire?" She asked, her voice overly calm, like she knew something I didn't. "I believe it will improve the feeling of the space like this." I was taken aback by the sharpness of her voice. It wasn't a suggestion. It felt like she was asking me for my agreement, but also like she didn't truly care if I gave it. It felt as though she had already decided this was how it was going to be. I attempted to keep my voice level, but I failed. "I didn't request that you rearrange the furniture, Piper." She looked at me blankly, almost as if she truly didn't understand. "What? It's just a few things, Christian. It'll make the space feel larger." She gestured casually with her hand. "Besides, you never have anyone over. It might as well look nicer." I stood there, gazing at her. The words lingered in the air, laden with something I couldn't put my finger on. It was a combination of frustration, bewilderment, and something that had just started to dawn on me. I was losing control of my own home. This wasn't simply about rearranging furniture or paint shades. It was about respect. I was struggling with limits. I'd tried to give her some breathing room, allowing her to stay with me while she got back on her feet. However, now it felt like she was making herself a permanent fixture, like this was her home, not mine. The issue wasn't even her behavior. It was the fact that I'd permitted things to go this far. I hadn't spoken up. I'd let her rearrange things, alter the feeling of the house, and I hadn't objected. I hadn't set any limits. I understood I needed to take action, but I couldn't determine how to address it without causing more problems. She was family, after all, but this was no longer just about our family ties. This was about my boundaries. This was regarding my life, my residence, and what remained of my recollections of Riley. A few days later, I came home and received an even bigger surprise. Piper was in the attic. It seemed strange the initial time I saw her up there, but I hadn't given it much thought. She'd explained she was just searching for items to give away. But when I went upstairs and saw her standing there, rummaging through a box that was obviously labeled Riley's mementos, I was stunned. "What are you doing?" I questioned, my voice tense, barely audible. She didn't even glance up. "Just looking through some things, deciding what can be gotten rid of. You don't need them anymore, do you?" My pulse quickened. "No, you can't. Piper, those things stay here. They mean a lot to me." She stopped what she was doing, her hand still resting on a pile of old scarves and various items. "I'm just tidying up, Christian, I mean." "Are you really planning on keeping all of this?" I declared with certainty, taking a step closer, attempting to hide my irritation. "This belongs to me and to my wife, and you won't be tossing it out." Then her gaze connected with mine, and for the first time I observed a different emotion within them, something more sinister, something that baffled me. "You're still clinging to all of this, aren't you?" She murmured quietly, almost as if she were talking to herself. "Perhaps you should consider letting go." A feeling of finality overcame me. I can't say if it was the way she said it or the fact that I'd been overlooking all the red flags, but I finally uttered the words that had been accumulating within me for several weeks. "Piper, I need you to go." She gazed at me like I'd just struck her. The room grew quiet. "You can remain here for a bit longer, but our relationship is over. You can't continue behaving as if this is still your home. I've been giving you room to breathe. I've let you live here while you figured things out, but the time has come for you to depart." Initially, she said nothing. She simply remained there. Her lips were compressed, her eyes wide, as though I'd stated the most outrageous thing possible. "You can't just throw me out like this, Christian," she stated after a lengthy pause, her voice shaking. "Yes, I can and I will. I'm done with this, Piper." And that was the conclusion. I had at last established boundaries. The anxiety remained after I said it. I wasn't certain what the future held, but I wasn't giving in. I wasn't concerned with how much she cried or attempted to negotiate. This place wasn't hers, and it never felt that way. I really hadn't anticipated what would occur afterward, however. Piper phoned our folks, and they didn't arrive to discuss things. Instead, they showed up to support her. They just couldn't grasp why I was acting so harshly, why I was making things more challenging for her, given that she was already facing difficulties. But that wasn't the most upsetting aspect of the situation. The worst part was when I showed up to Sunday supper with the security recordings and witnessed the expressions on their faces upon seeing her selling my wife's jewelry. Now I had no clue how this situation would unfold. But one thing was certain, there was no turning back. Final conclusion. I genuinely didn't think things would get to this stage with Piper. I truly hadn't anticipated it. I had made an effort to remain patient, attempting to be the understanding older sibling, but it felt like each day I offered her more of my personal space, more of my faith in her. She was taking more of my life. I had already asked her to depart. I'd informed her it was time to relocate, that her living here wasn't benefiting either of us. She'd contacted our parents, and naturally they sided with her. "She's been through a lot, Christian. She requires you," they asserted, as though I hadn't been the one consistently backing her this entire time. But nothing, absolutely nothing, readied me for what followed. The incident began so subtly that I didn't immediately comprehend what was happening. But a pivotal instant arrived when everything clicked, a moment when I clearly understood who Piper had morphed into. It wasn't just the way she disrupted my life or casually brushed off the most significant issue for me was her utter disregard for everything that was mine. It was on a Thursday, the week after I'd told her to move out and I was at my job. To be truthful, I didn't dwell on her much during the day. I was preoccupied, striving to concentrate on all the small details that still required my attention. But when I got back home that night, something felt strange. The house seemed calmer than usual. It was as if the space had contracted without her present, but it wasn't solely the vacancy that bothered me. Instead, it was the sensation that something had been altered. I entered the living room and I didn't immediately grasp what was happening. She had rearranged the furniture again. This time it was even worse. The central element was missing. The couch cushions were piled haphazardly in a corner, and there was a void where Riley's beloved lamp had formerly been. I didn't even need to inquire about its whereabouts. I knew. I marched into the kitchen, and there she was. Piper, seated at the counter, occupied with her phone as though everything was normal. Upon seeing me, she didn't even appear apologetic. She simply offered that composed, almost disinterested smile that consistently ignited something within me. "Where is it?" I asked, trying to maintain my composure. I was trying to keep my anger under control. She glanced up at me, initially puzzled. Then her eyes shifted to the empty spot beside me. "Where's what?" "Riley's lamp." "The one that was here," I said, my tone becoming strained. "The one she adored." Piper let out a sigh. I put her phone on the counter. That thing, I thought it was hideous. Seriously, it clashed with everything else, so I got rid of it. A shiver ran through me. "You got rid of it?" "Yep," she said, her tone almost flippant. "I didn't imagine you care after all. I'm just making your life easier. You don't need all that old stuff." My anger surged. But I stayed calm. I had to. I'd already laid down the law, and now she had taken my wife's belongings, sold them, as if they were worthless. That was the final insult. "Where is it, Piper?" I asked again. My voice soft. She just kind of moved her shoulders. "I don't know, Christian. I sold it to some woman down the street. She was really keen on it, I thought. It might make her day." My hands trembled then, but I made sure she didn't see it. I couldn't let her. I'd already reached a decision. I couldn't let this happen. It wasn't just the lamp. It wasn't just the item she'd gotten rid of or moved. It was everything. She acted like I owned nothing, like I was simply someone living in the house she was taking over. "Leave," I said. This time my voice was quieter, but the words still felt harsh, like a physical blow. Her eyes grew large and she stood up from the counter. "What?" she asked, sounding almost disbelieving. "Leave," I repeated. For a second, she just glared at me. Then she sighed, as if I had made an unreasonable request. "You can't just kick me out like this. You're being absurd, Christian. I'm your sister. You can't do this." The look in her eyes, I understood everything right then. She was trapped. She had no clue how far I was prepared to go at this point. She had gone too far, I thought. "I gave you a fair shot. I've been understanding with you," I told her, keeping my tone steady. "You're not staying here. Gather your belongings. You have a day." I turned and began heading. For the exit, I couldn't stay close to her a moment longer. My heart was pounding, but I kept my composure. I needed to leave the house to think clearly. I had given her everything. Room to breathe, tolerance, compassion, and all I got back were contempt and underhanded tactics. But then, that's when it occurred. The next morning I got an email. It was from an address I didn't know. I opened it with hesitation, and when I saw what it contained, I froze. It had video from my place. The time code showed the prior night, right after I talked to Piper about the lamp. The video quality was poor, but there was no doubt about what I was watching. My sister, Piper, using her phone, positioned by the front door, methodically putting Riley's jewelry into a small piece of fabric. She glanced around discreetly before putting it in a bag and going out. The house, I just sat there, staring at the screen, too enraged to even blink. Now I had the evidence. This wasn't just her taking my stuff. This was stealing, and not just ordinary stealing. This was my wife's jewelry. Items she used to wear, things that were extremely important to me. I couldn't believe she would. I never wanted to sink so low, but I had to act. I couldn't just let her get away with her actions. That Sunday, as our parents wanted us all to meet for dinner, I knew I had to challenge her. But I wasn't going to only use words this time. I entered their home, my phone ready, the incriminating video prepared to be displayed. My folks were already sitting down, and Piper was present, her typical charisma on full display, acting like everything was perfectly normal. She beamed when she saw me. However, when I showed them the video, their expressions changed dramatically. The room fell utterly quiet. Piper's gaze shifted around nervously, and I noticed her hand tremble a bit, yet she kept silent. My mom looked at Piper, then back at me, utterly unable to speak. My dad was the first to break the silence. You sold it," he asked Piper, his tone a mix of shock and fury. Piper's face turned red, and she began to speak, but no words emerged. Eventually, she stumbled over her words. I believed it would help him move on. It's just things. It's not important anymore." I didn't have to utter a word. I didn't need to. My parents could clearly see the reality of the situation. They understood I wasn't behaving irrationally, that I wasn't kicking her out without a cause. She had gone too far, and there was no repairing what was broken. Following a long, heavy silence, Piper got up, her face white and tight with rage. "You've ruined everything," she declared, her voice icy. "You're just as bad as Nathan." With that, she spun around and quickly exited the area. I didn't pursue her. I didn't have to. The harm had already been inflicted. In a strange way, I experienced an emotion I hadn't felt in ages. It was relief. Piper was finally out of my life. However, as she was departing, I understood that her departure wasn't just about the things she had taken. It was about me defending myself, standing up for the existence that I had created with Riley. At that instant, I understood that I had made the correct decision. I wasn't certain what the future would bring, but I wouldn't let anyone dominate me anymore. Not Piper, and definitely not anyone else. The silence returned to the house. For the first time in a long time, it actually felt like my dwelling.